Thursday, March 14th, 2018, Monaco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. So I'm a little later this morning. It's 12:20 London time, or 8:20 New York time. I'm going to look at the markets as usual, and I'm going to talk about why the Keynesian experiment has failed again, how we've almost had a lost decade in the UK, and that term lost decade of economic growth or for the economy is a term that was used a lot, in regards to Japan in the early 90s, mid 90s, and even to this day, Japan has had basically 3 lost decades. And why is that? Well, because they had a massive bubble in the 80s, late 80s that collapsed. And then the government, the central bank, bailed out the bankers, the financial system, and that's why we've had this, a lost 3 decades. And the same thing is happening to the UK, to the United States, I would say as well, and the whole of Europe. Maybe with the exception a little bit of Germany. But before I get into that, let's have a look at where we are this morning. Spot gold is 1325.70, down half a cent from the COMEX close, the after-hour close on COMEX last night. The range has been 1323 to 1330. Silver is up a cent and a half at 1660. Range has been 1654 to 1667. The Dow is up 108 points, up 0.4%. S&P up 10, 1/3%. Nasdaq is up 0.5% at 7,077. Currencies, they look fairly quiet this morning. The pound is up 15 pips or 0.1% at 139.80. The euro is down 6 pips or 0.05% at 123.85. And the dollar is virtually unchanged against the yen at 106.46. So I think yesterday we went back up above 107, and it looks like it's drifting back down. What else is going on? Interest rates. The 10-year yield is up a little bit. It's only up about 1 basis point at 285. We did drop earlier this morning to below 283, and it's in the last few hours it's rallied a little bit, which means bond prices have gone down. So the UK economy and the lost decade, and what should we have done? And the reason why we've had a lost decade in the UK is because when the system imploded in 2007 and 8, the government bailed out the banks. They indebted the country with hundreds, if not trillions of pounds in debt. There's a lot of hidden debt out there. The national debt has gone from around 800 billion to almost 2 trillion pounds since 2010. We had a change in government, of course, in 2010. Labour steered the country into the crisis. I remember speaking, in 2005 and 6 to colleagues at work that it wasn't sustainable, all the government spending that we're having, all the debt that was being, put into the economy. I said that the country would go bankrupt and everything would collapse, and people laughed at me. And it happened, 07, 08. And the problem is that we stuck to the Keynesian script. Whenever there's a problem with the banking system, whenever there's a problem with the economy, and the system teeters on the edge of collapse, the government comes in and bails everyone out. And why do they do that? Well, because in the Keynesian socialist haven or paradise, not paradise, but in a socialist fiat money Keynesian economy, government, is always big, and because there's no anchor or discipline of sound money, of free markets, and they just don't know what else to do. So what do? They just they say, oh, government will spend more, we'll have huge deficits and big debts, but everything will return, the economy will improve. So here we are now, 10 years later, and nothing has improved. And why am I talking about this? Well, because pretty soon we're going to have the spring statement, which is the Chancellor of the Exchequer, or the equivalent of the Secretary of the Treasury, is going to speak, Hammond in the UK. And this is what he says. Hammond proclaims turning point for economy. They've been proclaiming this for years. Well, Billy just got down. He doesn't want to listen to this. He's tired of it. He's been listening for it for a few years now. But anyway, so he'll be back, Billy. But and why do I say it's a lost economy? Well, because the right thing to have done, or a lost decade, the right thing to have done in 2008 is to have punished the people, not only the bankers and the governments, but also the people who borrow too much to buy a house, borrow too much to go on holidays, took unsecured loans. Everyone should have been punished. We shouldn't, the people who were, how can I say, prudent and didn't go into too much debt and had savings and, protected, their finances, they've been punished. And nothing, the people who should have been punished haven't, and nothing's changed. The City of London is still a casino for OTC derivatives, leverage, hypothecation, manipulation. It's gotten even worse. The government is still borrowing like a drunk and spending like a drunken sailor. There's no, they tell us that we've had austerity, but it's rubbish. If we had austerity, how come, since the Conservatives have been in power since 2010, how come the debt is more than doubled from 800 billion pounds to almost, 2 trillion? That's not austerity. And I even remember, and I actually found a story here from 2010 in the Telegraph, and I'll put the link below in the description for you guys to read, just to to show you that I'm not making this up. It says, Budget 2010, 8 years ago. George Osborne promises to balance books by 2015. And it goes on to say, George Osborne has said he will deliver a tough but fair budget, which will balance the books by 2015. So here we are, 2018, right? And I'll show you from the FT here, which I bought this morning, because I don't agree a lot with what the FT says, but they do report the the stories, the facts of the budget. And I've got here, the government is expected to borrow less. So this is the public sector net borrowing, which is the budget deficit, right? So for 2018, it's expected to be over 40 billion pounds. So that's for the fiscal year 17-18. So this is 3 years later from George Osborne, and we still have, more than, and I would argue that it's probably even more, they fiddle with the accounts, and it's more than 2% of the GDP. And yeah, they're only expecting to now, to reach balance in the budget by the middle of the 2020s. So that's like 10 years after George, that's like 15 years later, not 15 years, but 10 years later than George Osborne promised. So I'm sorry, there's a problem there. And I'll show you here that's the the budget deficit. Still expected to be like 20 billion by 2022, 2023. And they calculate these, of course, their projections are based on how the economy will grow. And you can bet that they don't legislate for a recession or a crisis. So this could get even worse. So what would have been the solution? Because I'm talking, showing you how things are not great, and GDP is still expected to remain around 1.5% for the next few years, according to the forecasts. Then the budget deficit is expected to remain, around 2 and go down to 1.5. So actually, the private economy is not growing. So what we should have done is what Iceland did. Let everything collapse. It would have been very, how can I say, disruptive. I'm sure that would have been probably social unrest, a lot of problems. But I think we would be, how can I say, our economy would be a lot better now. Everything would have changed a great deal, in my opinion. A lot of institutions that still exist, like the big banks in the city of London, and even the American banks, they wouldn't be around. All the Barclays, RBS, which was bailed out by the government and is still majority owned by the taxpayer, HSBC, Lloyd's, these would have all gone into the dustbin of history. The city of London, would have been punished. Not only maybe some people going to jail, but they wouldn't still be riding the gravy train that they do nowadays. They still do today with, huge bonuses, huge speculative activities. Hedge funds would have also, in my opinion, gone. A lot of them would have been destroyed. And that's what free markets are all about. Creative destruction. And what we're doing now, this is the government, the Bank of England, and the banking system. They're working together to keep, a few thousand people in power, a few thousand people with big bonuses, and at the expense of millions of Britons, by manipulating the capital markets. Right now, inflation is running around 4%, according to the RPI, which includes rents and housing. But, you look here on Bloomberg, and the gilt yield, which is the UK government bond, the 2-year yield, is 0.83%. The 10-year gilt yield is 1.48%. And the 30-year gilt yield is 1.87%. So with inflation at 4% and economic growth at, let's say, 1.5%, these rates should be at least 5%. Savers, the people who did all the right things, and also the people who bought precious metals, because precious metals are manipulated, they should have been, doing better. Savers, are being punished. And why are they being punished? Well, because the government and the banks and the debtors, which is the government and also, the public, they have to be kept going. Because if they allow the system to correct naturally through the market, interest rates would rise massively, bond prices would dump, mortgage rates would go through the roof, there would be loads of bankruptcies, the banks would collapse, the government would go bankrupt, would run out of money, the pound would drop even more, and it would be really painful. And they don't want that. They just keep delaying and delaying and delaying. And like, you know, it's called financial repression. But one day, all of this is going to like explode. You know, you can't keep this going forever. And what do you do in this environment? Well, you just try to do as much as the opposite from the public and the government and the banksters. You know, that means being frugal, you know, being prudent, saving, even though it doesn't pay to save, but saving, you know, saving some fiat money. But I recommend more, of course, gold and silver, physical gold and silver. Have some speculative investments if you want. And yeah, yeah, that's all you can do. And unfortunately, we're still stuck in this Keynesian quagmire in the UK, and it's also happening throughout Europe. Look at Italy. You know, no wonder their elections result were, you know, the far right parties did so well, and you know the populists, as they call it. And it's not better anywhere else in Europe, nor in the States. The States just has a bit more, you know, it's the policeman of the world, so that still, you know, kicks its economy into slightly higher gear. But there as well, you know, the deficits in the States are really big, budget deficits, and the private economy is still not doing well. So that's where we are. You know, this budget, you know, there's talk that he's going to give away 15 billion budget giveaway, that he's going to cut taxes. But where is he, you know, where is he going to get the 15 billion to give away? He's going to take from one group, you know, and then cut taxes from the other group. So nothing ever really improves. You know, you take with one hand and you give with the other. And we continue this philosophy that the state is, you know, is the great fiction, which everyone thinks they can live at the expense of everyone else, as Frederick Bastiat said. So there you have it. The state of the UK economy. It's probably going to be another lost decade unless, you know, the system implodes. So if you enjoyed this video, please like, share it, subscribe to my channel if you haven't yet. You can follow me on steemit.com as well and on Twitter, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.